Oh my God, we're live.
The countdown makes me very nervous before we hop on here. It's like, what did we used to use? MailChimp?
Oh,
Anyone
yeah.
who's ever used MailChimp for their email, before you send out an email, it's like this little GIF animation that comes up that's like, are you sure you want to send your email to this many thousands of people? And then it's like a little monkey's hand just like hovering over a red button.
Yeah.
And every time I was always
Just
like,
makes you sweat a little
well,
bit.
I was sure, but now I'm not.
Yeah.
And I would like pause and go back and look at
Yeah.
everything. But anyways, welcome back to our podcast.
Here we are, episode 2.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Made it through the first one.
we did. It was super fun. I really
Yeah.
enjoyed that first conversation. And now we're
Yeah.
going to dig in a little bit more to the real founder story
Yeah.
of Amy and Goldilocks and how it all came together. So, like, when did it first start? Let me preface that by saying, not so much like, oh, I want to be an entrepreneur, but like that first thing where you're like, I'm going to make this product and start selling it. Like, what was that first little inkling or idea that you had to get moving on the project?
So I had originally decided to make a beeswax wrap, singular.
Okay.
Like that was the intention behind making a beeswax wrap as a gift for my mom for Christmas. So I always joke that she was like the saran wrap queen.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like all of my parents, all of my parents' friends, all of my friends' parents growing up, there was just like so much plastic wrap. And like, especially around the holidays, because this was when I was wanting to make the first beeswax wrap. I always remember my mom having these like plates of cookies and then like trying to get into them as a kid and as an adult. And they were just like never ending. Like it was like, it started and then it was like, she took like half a roll and it just went in one direction. And then you'd be so excited because you'd get to the end only to realize that just to be extra sure that they were fresh, she had also wrapped them in the opposite direction.
Yeah.
So it was like this little cross thing. But the reason I had wanted to start making them was because I had become much more aware about like plastic pollution, specifically in our oceans. So to backtrack a little bit of like how that journey even kind of like brought me to that point of wanting to make them was that I mentioned in the last kind of episode that I had left, my job as a wedding and event coordinator back in Ontario and knew that I wanted to move out to the West Coast. And in the interim, I decided I was going to travel for a little while. And one of the places that I stopped was at a volunteer project. It was a shark conservation project in Fiji. It was amazing. It was probably one of the best things I've ever done in my life. Before other people are wondering, yes, we did dive with sharks, and no, we weren't in a cage. So it was amazing.
What kind of sharks were they?
Mostly bull sharks.
Yeah.
I did a separate tiger shark dive that wasn't part of the project. Also not in a cage. That was different. The tiger shark was like I'm very glad that I did it, but it was a different vibe.
They're more aggressive than bull sharks.
And they're so much bigger. And they're like, you can just tell the way they move through it was eerie.
Right.
It's like a small bus moving through the water but like you don't see it until it's so close.
Right.
And you're like,
come out of the blue and they're just
literally.
there.
Yeah. And it's like the fact that I didn't see something that large and that is capable of moving that quick. Like there's no way. Like you would, you're done. You'd be like, by the time you could die before you even knew that it was there. But sharks are fun. Sharks are not scary. They're just exhilarating. And the difference with the bull sharks is that it was part of a study. So they were being fed and we're monitoring them.
Yeah.
And like kind of looking out for certain sharks that are returning. So you can track like mating patterns, yada, yada. There's a lot that goes into that particular project. But there was about 50 bull sharks on the day that I was there. But there kind of felt like the vibe of those sharks was more like puppy dogs who were just excited that they were eating. Like they did not care that we were there watching. Right. There's like a whole bunch of people sitting on the bottom just essentially watching them get fed. And they're just like, oh, cool, you're here. I don't care. Bye. Yeah. And they just like turn around.
You're
and
not
leave.
food.
Yeah. Whereas, and they're kind of used to that. They're used to being around people, which, people can argue in both directions, kind of like positive and negative impacts that has. But as a whole, the project was like really amazing. And they do a lot of really wonderful work in terms of like awareness and like tracking and all of the science that goes into it. The tiger shark dive was much more of a like, it was just a single female tiger shark. Much, much more
Sharky.
Yeah,
Less
like
puppy doggy.
hesitant and like cautious and like clearly was not sure of what we were and why we were there. And she would kind of do these circles and like track us. Like it felt more, yeah, like predatory.
Yeah.
But it was a beautiful experience, and I'm still really like, I would go shark diving again in a heartbeat. But anyways, I digress.
Yeah.
But as part of that project, we actually had to do coursework as well. So it wasn't just like, diving every day. We had to do a lot of like research. We had to pass tests, it was fairly intensive. And part of one of the pieces of coursework was plastic pollution in the ocean. And I always feel kind of silly telling this story because it's like, well, how did you not know that plastic pollution in the ocean was a problem? And I'm like, yes, but remember, but also remember that like this was 7-8 years ago, and the awareness around this kind of problem, climate change, like it seems like it's something that's so big that like, how did we ever not know about this? How was this ever not top of mind?
Right.
But it wasn't.
It's also like just early social media. Right?
Exactly. Like early kind of, I don't even say like early internet, because the internet had been around for a while, but it was just different. Like the way that information spreads now, the level of like information and awareness that you have access to now is just like so much different and so much faster. So, and again, growing up in like a small town and all of those kinds of things. So for me, it was like the first time at that project that I was really like confronted with this as a problem. Yeah. And I also do genuinely feel that things that like are problematic, it's easier if you're not seeing it up front and like in your face. Right. So very easy to be out of sight, out of mind, growing up in like a rural area where you're not near the ocean. It's kind of easy to just like not really think about it, or like, whereas when you're walking down a beach and you see plastic, like that actually really like can hurt your soul, when you're like really seeing it and you're really aware of that like life cycle of a product. And I know that everybody at the project was very like bummed out after that particular course that we were taking. And, we had a lot of conversations about how terrible we all are as like human beings, and all of the things that, like how we're all parasites and we're just kind of
shame
like
spirals.
Exactly. And you just feel this, I think, overwhelming sense of dread and kind of like inability to know what to do. Like, what am I as a single person going to do? This is such a massive problem.
Right.
Like, what's the point? Right. I'm sure a lot of people listening have probably thought about that. I also sometimes ask that still today. Like, these problems are so big that it's like, what do I as a single person do? How do I contribute? Can I even? Is it even going to make an impact? All of those conversations were had. And I think the way that I left that project feeling was just, I kind of came to a place of like, you know what? I can only control what I do at this point, and I'm going to take responsibility for that. I'm going to take responsibility for myself, and I'm going to do things that are going to make me feel better. And I'm going to make a conscious choice to lead and a more eco-friendly lifestyle. I had no idea what that meant, what that was going to look like, what I was going to do. I did not leave that project thinking I am going to go try and change the world and start a business. I was just like, I'm going to do what I need to do in like my life and around my house and at home. And hopefully people will see that, and maybe people will be interested. Maybe that will inspire people. Kind of just like take it one step at a time, go from there. And then I had actually been introduced to the concept of a beeswax wrap while I was on my travels. I don't remember exactly where I was. I think I might have been in Australia or something, somewhere else in the South Pacific when I was traveling around afterwards. It was the same thing. Like I saw them. I don't know if I was at a friend's house and they were using them, or kind of like what the deal was. But I just remembered thinking, that's cool. Literally, like, did not think about it again after my travels. Until I got back into Ontario, and it was around Christmas time. And now this brings us to what I was telling you about, where I decided that I needed to make this thing for my mom, because I kind of saw all the plastic wrap once I was like home. That she was using, and was like, oh, that thing that was, I saw would be really cool. And I remember going to some stores, and like we had like a kind of more like eco-friendly kind of like nature kind of like store. I don't even remember what category you would put it into, because it was fairly like cutting edge, I would say, for the small town that I was in, and for like Ontario, that kind of time frame, And they didn't have anything. I don't even think they'd heard of them, to be honest. online shopping also wasn't really like a big thing then. It feels so weird to say because I'm like, how did we ever like that? Like, you know, the time frame I'm talking about isn't actually that long ago.
7
like
or 8 years ago.
Yeah, I'm like, it feels crazy to think that that wasn't as big as it is now.
Amazon was a weird and scary place 7 years
Yeah.
ago. Now it's the biggest thing in the world.
It's commonplace.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And so then I have always been a very crafty person. I love making things. I've just always been like that. Like as a kid, I'm an only child. I used to just like color by myself for like hours. At least it felt like hours. I'm sure my mom would be like, Amy, that was 20 minutes. But like I've just always loved making things. I used to make jewelry as a bit of a side hustle at some point as well when I was in school.
Isn't that where the Goldilocks wasn't? It was
No,
like Goldilocks Travel Co.
Yeah, that's a whole other business that I thought about starting.
Right. But it turned into this one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can go back.
The name.
We'll talk about the name shift. Yeah, for sure. But it, yeah. So then I just decided I wanted to make them because I couldn't find them to purchase anywhere at the time. That was like easily accessible. And I thought, you know what, I can do this. Read a couple blog posts, seemed relatively straightforward. Somehow managed to find all of the ingredients. I think that instead of jojoba oil at that time, I might have been using like coconut oil because it was like more accessible. Found everything that I thought I needed, realized that all of the blogs were wrong because the end product was not at all what the one I saw in Australia was like. The one in Australia, I remembered it was like, this actually works like a plastic wrap. Like it sticks to things, all that kind of stuff. The ones I was reading blog posts about was like just beeswax and cotton. And so it was more like a wax paper. Like it didn't stick to anything. Right. And I was like, okay, if I actually expect my parents to use this product, it needs to function like a plastic wrap. Yeah. Or I know as soon as I'm not in the house, you know, they're probably going to go back to maybe like not using it anymore. Because if it's going to be more work than whatever they were using before, also just as humans, like why would you do that? Right? Totally. So I did a little bit more, you know, diving and research and kind of experimentation. And I think it took me like a month just because by the time when I like would track down ingredients and like figure out what I actually needed to do. So like a month later, I feel like I finally had a beeswax wrap that I was like happy with. But that also meant that I had enough ingredients to make like 60 to 100 beeswax wraps, just like, you know, chilling at home. And I was like, what am I going to do with all of this stuff? My mom only needs a couple. She does not need 100. And so because I had a bit of a background with going to farmers markets already with like my jewelry business that I did as just like more of a hobby than anything in the past, I kind of had that connection and knew it would be fairly easy for me to, you know, just go set up a booth. Specifically, this would have been a Christmas market that they were hosting. And I thought, you know what, I'm just going to try and sell some of them. They might not sell at all because most people in my kind of pod would have no idea what a beeswax wrap was, especially small town rural Ontario. I was like, I don't know how this is going to go, but we're going to try. My goal was really to just make back the money I had spent on all of the ingredients that I had ordered. So I go to this farmer's market and they sold out within the first 2 hours of being there.
Sick.
That was my light bulb moment. Being like, is this a thing? This could be a business. Like this has potential. And at that point, I already knew that I was going to be moving out here. So knowing also just that like the West Coast as a whole in Canada is like way more environmentally friendly and like way more kind of forward thinking when it comes to that kind of world. So I thought if I can sell these in Lindsay, Ontario, I can sell these anywhere. Like that was literally my thought process. And that was the first time that and I didn't know how. I didn't know what that was going to look like. I was like, maybe it'll just be, again, like a bit of a side hustle hobby to like my current job that I knew I was going to be moving out here with. But I don't know. That was the first kind of like spidey sense tingling of being like, maybe this could be a thing.
When someone hands you money for something, it's hard to not be like, oh shit. And especially when it feels because you're passionate about it and it's something that you're like, oh, I was making this anyways, just as like to help my mom. I wasn't trying to turn this into a business, but that came from a place of passion to like do all that research, like find the ingredients, like put that money into it to just know that like, I'm just doing this because there's a problem that I think is really shitty. I'm going to do what I can about it to make it better, at least in my family circle. But then someone just like gives you a $20 bill and you're like, if I do this again, will someone give me another $20 bill and then another $20 bill? And then it's just like, wait, maybe I can shift from doing this other thing. It's like the slow build of like, well, if there's this much demand here, where else is there? And like, what's the ceiling? And you just have to like go down the rabbit hole.
Yeah.
And just keep going. So you came out to Victoria and you just signed up for as many markets as you could.
Yeah. So actually, I don't know if I've ever told you, there's so many things already that I'm like, I don't know if you know this or not.
Maybe not.
I actually planned on moving to Tofino originally.
Mhm.
That was like kind of my
I didn't know
original
that.
plan. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, but then once I knew that like this was a possibility and I knew that I was going to want to go to farmers markets and things like that, Tofino only has, it's very small.
Yeah.
And it only has one farmers market. Victoria, I think at the time when I looked it up, had some crazy, I want to say like 13 markets on like any given week that you could attend in all of the different kind of like, areas of Victoria.
Yeah.
So what I did was I kind of left it up to fate. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to apply to the Tofino farmers market. I'm going to apply to a couple of other farmers markets in Victoria. And wherever accepts me first, I'm going to move.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Which one was it? Was it Esquimalt?
It was the Esquimalt farmers market. Yeah. They called me back the same day that I applied. And then I got off the phone and she was so excited. They were very excited about having like an eco-friendly company.
Did she
that
know
was
about
like,
Beeswax wraps at the
she
time?
did. Yeah. She had heard what she knew what they were, was like very excited about like me wanting to be at their market, all of the things. So then that got my excitement level like through the roof that this was the right decision and this is what I should be doing. I think a few days later, I ended up hearing back in the Tofino market was full. Like I think it's a very small community. So like it fills up pretty quickly. And within like a week or two, I was kind of touring places to live via FaceTime to like pick a spot where I wanted to go. And then was able to also get into 2 more farmers markets as well. So when I was moving out here at one point, I was doing like 3 markets a week, which was a lot. But
why did you move so far? Like, what were you doing up in Shelburne? You were like pretty north.
I did not have a good understanding of the layout of Victoria. Also coming from like a small town, when you like look at, so where my apartment for people who are listening was when I first moved out here, it's like kind of north in Victoria. It's technically a different municipality.
It's Saanich.
Yeah.
Yeah. You moved to Saanich.
Yeah. So it's out by like UVic, the University of Victoria was kind of like the area that I was moving into. And it's like maybe like a 15-minute drive to downtown, maybe 20 if you're driving, like depending on traffic.
15 to 20. Yeah.
Yeah. And to me, because I grew up in a small town, I had to drive like 20 minutes to high school every day on a highway. Yeah. Like you're going like 90 to 100 for 20 minutes, not like in city traffic.
Way more.
Like the distance. Yeah, the distance was much bigger. So I was like, oh, that's not that bad. Like driving 20 minutes to downtown's nothing. Moved to Victoria and was like, oh, there's like very distinct sections of this city. I don't even know if you call them like neighborhoods. Some of them are actually separate municipalities. No, not a lot of people leave their hood.
Yeah.
So very quickly realized that where I was actually very far removed from like a lot of the people that I was meeting and all of those things. So that was a sublet that I was in. I knew it was temporary because I wanted to get to know the city to be able to choose the area of town that I thought would suit me best. So I also knew that it was temporary. I think it was only for like 3 months or something like that too. So kind of had that in the back of my mind. Didn't think that like it was actually that far because the reality is that it's not. Like physically, it's not that far, but it is like a world away when you kind of get into more like the downtown community for sure.
Yeah. Well, it's like small town rural life versus like urban life. And Victoria is one of those interesting kind of like small cities.
Yeah.
It's kind of the perfect size.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people say that there's enough people here where it's like not hard to continually meet new people, but there's a really amazing sense of community. It's a lot of familiar like faces everywhere you go, which is sweet. But, yeah, and then you found Fernwood, which is like at the time, Fernwood was the place. Yeah. I mean, you're not there anymore. I'm not there anymore. But what a special little community that is.
I still get like all tingly when I go back to Fernwood. I'm just like, I love it here. It's such a special place. It's just like very magical. And I feel like
it does feel like a little fairy tale.
It does.
Terry the Bubble Man outside, blowing bubbles in the street. Everybody's hugging. You're like, what's going on here?
All the telephone posts are painted like with all these like cool artwork pieces, and it's just like I don't know, it's just such a vibe. I love it there.
Yeah.
I would still,
Great.
I would move back to Fernwood in a heartbeat.
For sure.
And it's also kind of like where a lot of those moments happen, like where I met you
Yeah.
for the first time, where we like started making wraps in the apartment there.
I think I met you at the Fernwood Market, because I think I just popped down from the apartment.
Right.
And I was just like hanging out at the Fernwood Market, and then you were at the Fernwood Market.
Maybe. It sounds about right.
So I was like right outside the apartment
Probably.
that you know, were moving into. So
yeah,
it's crazy.
So it's just like feeling a lot of
Ground
those
zero.
like very kind of like early serendipitous moments also happened in Fernwoods, which is also why it has like a special place in my heart too. It's like a lot of early memories of being in Victoria and whatnot. So, and we also had like our first technically commercial space.
Yeah, out
in
on our
Fernwood
own.
as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was exciting. We'll get into that story too, because that's a funny one, how that all happened.
Yeah.
But yeah, so then I was here and I was doing all of the markets, like 3 markets a week, and was really keen to do markets not only because I wanted to be able to like have conversations with people and like, you know, get the product out there, and because most people had no idea what beeswax wraps were.
Right.
I needed to have those like face-to-face conversations. It needed a lot of education, a lot of explanation, which would have, I think, been a lot more difficult to do just directly like online. Like, I'm really glad that I had that like in-person face-to-face time over like the first couple of years to be able to do that with people. And for me, it was also a great way to meet people, like being new to a city and just like getting out there and like talking to people. Like one of my closest friends now, I met her at a market. She just came, she was a customer, came up to the booth. We just got chatting. I don't even really remember exactly like what we were talking about, but we totally hit it off. And I was basically like, I'm new here too. Do you want to hang out and be friends? Like, it wasn't that awkward, but like, that's how I like the vibe of what I remember the conversation being like in my head. And yeah, it's great. And then like so many people that I've met through her since then, like it's just, it becomes this web, right? As soon as you kind of meet like one person that you like really jive with in Victoria, I feel like there's this whole other world of people and opportunities that kind of like open up. So yeah, that's kind of how I went from diving with sharks to slanging beeswax
wraps at the market. Yeah, and so I couldn't agree more that if someone is going to start a product-based business, 100%, you just got to go like hit the market scene, because you will, if you're not good at sales, you will be forced to learn sales, right? And not even so much like in a, you know, I'm picking up like sales tactics. It's like you have to learn how to listen to people, right? It's not a great idea to come into a market or space where you're selling something and just be like, I'm going to tell you what this is, right? So at a market, people are going to walk up to you and be like, what the hell is this? And you have to explain it over and over and over. And some people come up and they completely get it wrong. Or some people come up and just kind of like, oh, these are stupid and expensive, and they walk away. And so you deal with a lot of rejection, which is, you know, toughen your skin a little bit of just like, oh, this isn't for everyone. Just because I'm passionate about it doesn't mean everyone's going to love it.
Yeah.
So like that learning curve of at a market, it's hard to quantify, but I couldn't recommend it enough. And I don't think a business would be as strong, product-based business, if they haven't been through that to start.
Exactly.
You really learn. That's where like you get all your data in the beginning.
Yeah, all that feedback that you get from like talking to people and just like listening to customers, and then like I could, and it was interesting because it was the same things, right, that would come up over and over again. I could do like, I don't even like calling it the sales pitch, but it was just like going through, because it didn't feel like I was doing sales. And I think that was like a really big thing for me. But that was also, I think, what resonated with the customer was that like this was very much integrated into like this new lifestyle that I was trying to, you know, kind of like delve into for myself outside of work, and then like wrapping it into a business. So when I would have conversations with people, I was just genuinely excited to like share what it was that I was doing. And if it was for them, then great. And if they were also interested, I would talk to them all day about it. And if it's not for them, then like that's okay too. Because I feel like that was kind of like a sales skill that I didn't realize, I wasn't intentional, but in hindsight was like exactly the right thing to do. Because people know when they're being sold to, right? Or when it's not authentic. And for me, it was just like such an extension of like my life and what I was doing and what I was passionate about and what I cared about. And people just saw that. Right. And then you're like, this is cool. I'm also now excited the same way that you felt, where like I
Yeah.
told you about what I was doing, was like genuinely excited about it, and then
Yeah.
you got jazzed.
Yeah. I was attracted to the passion.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, this girl like really cares about this. This is interesting.
Yeah.
Like that's why I was pulled in. Like I had actually heard about beeswax straws before. I didn't really get pulled into the product. I didn't know the owners or whatever. Like it was just a product.
Mm-hmm.
But like seeing someone who's just like, here's my story, here is why I'm doing this, and just like kind of seeing it in your eyes of just like, and I'm not gonna stop.
Yeah.
You're like you're like, oh, I want to support you, right? Like if I'm at a market and let's say, I don't know, I'm looking for like a cutting board, and there's like two people selling cutting boards like side by side, and the one guy is just kind of like hanging back, and like you can tell maybe he doesn't work, like he's not the owner, he just works there, and he's just like kind of, you know, clocking in, clocking out. But then there's a guy over and he's just like telling you about all these different grains of wood and like, you know, like where he sources his wood, and you can just like see it, you know, like the blisters on his hands and stuff, and you're like, oh, this guy's like in the game, like he cares about this. And there's a connection where you're like, if this person cares about this much, this is just going to be a better product, right? Like it's going to be a better product. When I have a problem and reach out to them, I'm probably going to get better service because they give a shit.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's something like very attractive about that as a consumer, or that's just looking for that product, that like pulls you in. And it's like you don't necessarily know what's going on, right? Like you don't know why you want to give that person your money and support them, but it's like it's an easy decision if you like they break it out like that where it's side by side, right? So
well, there's that saying, I forget I'm going to butcher it, but something along in the vein of like, when you're buying something, like you're buying from the person or like from the brand, not the product.
Yeah.
Right. Like that's what creates that like feeling and that connection and like that community, and like you're part of now that like passion and, you know, desire and wanting to support somebody that's like you think is doing something that's really cool. Right. And yeah, being able to go to markets and do that and like see other people get excited, especially when it was a product that they'd never heard of before, and them get really excited about it. That was like really inspiring. It was like this loop of just like inspiration where like they would be inspired by me and then I would be inspired by them, and we were all just having this like awesome love fest, and it was great. But it was also like people will ask, well, what was your marketing strategy in the beginning? And I'm like, I went to markets.
Yeah.
Like, that is the original marketing.
Right.
It's literally in the name.
Yeah,
like
face to face, education, passion, word of mouth. That's it. Also, we gave away a ton of free shit at the beginning.
We gave away a lot of wraps.
And I highly recommend that strategy too. Like if you can afford to do it as a maker, and you just want, especially if it's something new, right? Like people are like, oh, that's kind of a cool idea, but I've never used anything like that before. You got to be like, okay, well, you got to try this. And they're like, not right now. And you're like, just take it. And then, you know, 2 weeks later, those people come back to your market and they're like, I tried them. I'm buying one for my mom. I'm buying one for my brother. Yeah. Let's do this. And you're like, holy shit, like that only cost me $5. And I gave this to this person and it felt like a loss at the time. But in the beginning, like, yeah, get your product into people's hands, right?
Yeah, especially when it's something that, I mean, for us, it was something that was like people had never used before as well, right? But for, you know, other businesses, even just to show that yours is different or better or just unique in some way, and like give people that experience and the opportunity to be able to try it. So that was, we did give away a lot of stuff, but it was always worth it.
Totally.
It was always worth it in the long run.
And it's like one of the marketing levers that you can pull at the beginning if you don't like, because you're already putting money into your product, right? Mm-hmm. Like maybe you don't have extra cash for a marketing budget or like buy ads or whatever it is. It's like, it's one of the things, like one of the few things you do have. You're like, well, I can like, you know, I got a bunch of this stuff right now. I got all the products. I've already like purchased everything. And, you know, like I can make more, right? So it's like, it's within your power. Like you talk about like what's in your control, the ability to do is like, I know that if I give a bunch of these away and like maybe nothing happens, like at least I can make more. Like I understand the process. I know I can do it. But if you don't have any of the marketing skills at the time, which like you didn't, we didn't. No, so it was like, all right, what do we got? Like we got education, we got passion, and we can like get this into people's hands and like get their feedback too. Yeah. And that's so valuable when they come back and they tell you, oh, this is great. Or like, oh, I didn't really like the smell of this. Or like, you know, there's little things that the customers will tell you. And then you start to see the patterns of like, oh, and we didn't actually like change much.
No.
So not to be cocky, but like it, you know, you did a good job from like the original recipe and stuff. You
Yeah.
might have tweaked a little things
I
here and
think
there.
I remember I did swap out the coconut oil from the beginning
Right.
because some people would have allergies. You're more likely
Okay.
to be allergic to coconut oil, whereas jojoba oil is considered a
Right.
non-allergenic. So that was the only kind of like switch that was made.
Yeah.
It's also more expensive.
hmm
But I felt like that was something that was important. I actually remember doing like when we got to a point where you were doing markets with me,
Yeah.
and people would come up to the booth, and you were like, "Can you give us the criticism? Like we're trying to learn." Because like people would just come to the booth, and this is a great problem to have, but it was just overwhelmingly positive.
Right.
Like very rarely would we get. I actually can't think of like hardly any like negative feedback that we would get, and you'd be like, can you give us some like critical feedback or like something you'd like to see change? Like we're trying to improve. And they were just like, no, this is great. We love it. Keep doing what you're doing. We're like, oh, okay, cool.
Yeah. Which is great. That's awesome. That means you're on the right track. And I highly recommend that too, of just like always asking for critical feedback. It's something that we do as well in our like 90-day, 120-day check-ins with our staff too, right? Is like, you know, we go through all the good vibes, we say everything that's good, and then it's, you know, kind of turns around on us like, do you have any like thing that you maybe like, have we done something that's bothered you? Anything?
Or even
Safe space, just like any feedback? Is there anything in the space that we could be doing better?
Yeah, how can we better support you?
Yeah.
Even if it's not something we're doing wrong, it's like, how could we even be even better?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And it's not necessarily asking for negative feedback. It's just acting, for constructive criticism. Like, we just want to try and improve.
Yeah. We've had that also.
Those people are really nice though. So you got to try and like, especially Canadians.
Yeah.
You're like, say something mean. Come on.
Gotta poke the crowd a little bit.
Yeah.
But so I feel like that's sort of like the early days of like
Right.
Goldilocks marketing. You know, the original OG marketing.
Huh.
And I feel like the secondary piece of that like same time period was figuring out the production.
Yeah.
Right? Because I was making wraps by myself for a long time.
Mm.
You came on board and I was saying how I couldn't keep up with production. I couldn't do both. I couldn't attend as many markets as I was attending and make enough product that I needed to make. And especially I think because by the time you came on board, we were headed into the Christmas season. And I knew that was going to be just craziness.
Yeah.
And I think that I'm actually really excited to kind of talk about this component because I feel like this is a piece of the puzzle that a lot of makers or crafters specifically really struggle with, right? Because you have your craft that you love and that you're passionate about and you put so much of like your love and energy into. But as one person, you can only do so much. And you know what? There's always going to be, you know, people who they are wanting to just go to the markets. They want to do it themselves. And I love that. You know, I think there's like a place for everybody, right?
Yeah. We're talking about people who
are interested in scaling.
Exactly. Who like want to build whatever product or service they have into a business. Yeah.
Or just have a bigger, have a larger reach. Because I still think that for people who are attending those farmers markets, whether they think of it as a hobby, whether they know it or not, they're running a business. Yeah. Right? At the end of the day, if they're taking in money and they're in exchange for a product, it's like you are a business owner. Yeah. Whether you think of yourself that way or not is like totally up to them and what their comfort level is. But I think I very much have big dreams for what I wanted to do, right? We're like, we want to eliminate single-use plastics. Like, that's a very audacious, lofty goal, you know, kind of thing. And I really struggled with not knowing many people here. So not really knowing like who do I even talk to about help? Where do you get help from? I don't know how to like, do we have to hire people? I feel like that was a component that like you helped immensely with. Do you remember that like phase?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because
talk about it from your perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It was, I could see, well, you were telling me how much you're making. So like, I was like, okay, you know, what does it cost? You told me how much it costs. I was like, sweet, great margin. Also, something that's very important to think about is when you're pricing your product, your margin. And a good rule of thumb is if it costs you $5 to make something, you should be selling it for at least 20, right? Retail, right? So it's like a 4x multiplier. So you already had all that.
I think most businesses do 3 is a lot of what I hear for people too. Yeah.
Okay.
But I think that it depends if you're going to do wholesale, because you want to build in margins if you're going to do wholesale down the line, right?
Yeah. So a way to do it for wholesale is that you want to make sure that you can go double your cost of goods to wholesale. So if you're 5, you want to wholesale at 10, and then you could technically retail at 15.
Yeah, in between
right?
the 15.
But if you got another 100% jump up from 5, cost 5 to 10 wholesale,
keeps the
10 to
retailers
20.
happy.
Yeah, and then you have a lot of margin for promotions, sales, discounts on that retail side, right? So that's, it can be between 3 and 4.
Yeah.
But so yeah, you had that figured out, which was like, all right, good stuff. And once we knew that, I had that figured out, it was like, well, we can hire people. Like, there's plenty of margin to hire people. And I think this is where there's a bit of that mental block. You're like, but how do I pay people to do this? It's like, well, then you have to go and do something else, right? It's like, and that was challenging because I had to like pull you out of the waxing room.
I feel like
and
you
be
had to like pry my cold hands
Yeah.
away from the hot wax of
Exactly.
being like, no one's going to do this as well as I do. No one's going to care as much as I do or be as particular as I am. What if they screw it up? It's going to ruin everything. I had a bit of a control thing that it took a little while for me to let go of. Right. And I think that that's how a lot of people feel, right? If it's something that you're really passionate about and you're a bit of a maker or crafter.
Right. But it's completely ego, right? And like, not to downplay beeswax wraps, but we're waxing cotton.
Yeah, it's
I just remember saying that, like, Amy, we're waxing cotton. I got this.
It's not rocket science.
Yeah. Like, and you did the work for like the formulation and stuff. So like, once that was done and like the process, it was like, okay, this isn't like you put the wax and the cotton, like don't miss any spots, make sure it's fully saturated, fold it up, good to go, make sure everything's straight. Like, I was like, yeah, it's pretty simple. I can teach this to people. And once we got you out of there, it was great. And then I just brought in a bunch of friends who all became your friends.
Yeah, exactly.
And we had a little, our own little Goldilocks Christmas factory.
Yeah.
That we started up probably October, November. Yeah. When we really got going.
In the apartment.
Yeah, in the apartment. But what was great is that, like, okay, so now you're not doing that anymore, which is a ton of your time. So then, like, what did you fill your time with?
I know you said that. Now I don't remember.
You were on social media. You were like,
was I that early?
Building the brand. You were. If you go all the way back.
Yeah, I still have like the original like Goldilocks posts. I think even before we were called Goldilocks. Like, if you go back and you do a deep dive on our Instagram, it's just a band that says Beeswax Wraps with a little cartoon bee. Yeah. And that's like what
I don't remember exactly when the name came in, but it would have been that fall sometime. When I met you, it wasn't Goldilocks yet, but you had Goldilocks Travel Co. Yeah. But the point I'm making is that if you're going to be the founder in something and you're going to like steer the ship, like, sure, you can be like in there with your hands doing stuff, but just not all the time. Yeah. You have to go out and like build a brand. Yeah. And I just remember thinking, it was like, okay, I'd seen your Instagram. I saw your aesthetic for design. I saw the way you put everything together. I was like, this is very like aesthetically pleasing and people love this product. I think that that's what a big portion of my time was also doing, was like going, because at that point in time, I was just going to like fabric stores to buy fabric. Right. And because we were doing much smaller like print runs, it was like much more regularly that I was having to do that. Yeah. And like kind of assembling and curating the way that the sets would like go together. Yeah. I feel like that was also a big chunk of my time too. I think, and then, yeah, as our like a little bit of e-commerce sales started, I think you were taking care of like the shipping and stuff, because I had taken you out of the, or was I doing the shipping? You did shipping once we moved, but that was like once we moved into the commercial space. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. See how hard it is to remember? I know. I'm like, what did I do? But I remember, anyways, I remember the thing that I knew from my little bit of business education that I had done was that I was like, I gotta get Amy out of this area so she can put at least 80% of her energy into the brand. Because like, if you don't have the person, especially like Goldilocks, you're Goldilocks, I call you Goldilocks, you're the brand, you're the face, the more energy and time that you can do on like face-to-face brand stuff, building the brand social, it's just like, that's what's going to work. Building out a website. I remember building out a website at one point. Yeah. I was also the one that was mostly going to the markets, I think, at that point too. And I remember I did the math at one point of how, if you counted like setup and teardown of how many markets I was doing in 1 week, I think it was close to like 30, 35 hours a week. Right. Like going to just markets was almost a full-time job in and of itself. And then doing like that's when it got to be too much. When I was like, I can't also then try and make all the products. Yeah. So then that's, I think, how that all kind of like fit together. Right. Yeah. So we went from there, and then do you want to get into like the business side of just like how we actually started the business? Because
Yeah.
I mean,
I do. I think before we dive into that, I have a
okay,
question for you.
okay,
Because we've had conversations. We've had people who, as we kind of got a little bit farther down the line with Goldilocks, who, either we were friends with or just were, fellow makers who came to us and we were like looking for advice on how to kind of expand beyond themselves, right? And that seems to be like a big tripping point for a lot of people. It's very overwhelming to start thinking like not even knowing where to start,
right,
right? Of like knowing you have a dream and that you want to have your product or whatever it is that you're making reach more people than what it is currently reaching. And knowing like how to do that in terms of like, how do I make enough product? How do I like, what would be your piece? So if there's anyone listening that's kind of in that phase, they're like currently making things from home, right? Whether it's like jewelry, whether it's like some kind of food product, and they know that, and it's just them, maybe like one other person,
yeah,
right? It's just them. They're like, we're making as much as humanly possible in the space that we're in and with the people that we have. And they know that they like want to move, one day they want to be in like stores and one day they want to have an e-commerce store, but they're
right.
like not there yet, right? What would be, do you think would be like the most important first step for them to take? Because I think, in my opinion, taking that first step is the scariest one.
Yep.
And everything else after that
Gets less scary.
you kind of just like have to figure it out as you go. And that's exactly what we did. We've never really had much of a plan, to be like totally transparent. It's been very much like one step at a time, dealing with challenges as they get thrown at us. But what do you think because for me, that was the biggest thing.
Yeah.
Letting go of me having to be the one to make and do everything on my own was that first step for Goldilocks.
Right.
So like, what would you say, would you recommend to other businesses? Like, what do you think what is the most important first
people
thing?
that want to make that jump?
Yeah.
Find someone that they trust. Like that, it has to be it, right? Because what's the thing that, the good saying, like 1 + 1 = 3, right? It's like, if you have somebody else in your business that you trust that can work alongside you and they're motivated properly, right? Like I came in and I was like, I want to be an owner with you. And you were like, let's do it. So I was like, okay, now I'm incentivized, right? Like I'm a partner. I'm in like a partnership with you. And so I've got skin in the game. Like I care a lot about this. It wasn't about money in the beginning. It was just like, we are both involved in the equity of this brand now. So I think that is a really good thing. And it's very hard for people to do because you're like, do I give equity to someone and 6 months down the road? Like that's a common story.
Yeah.
So it's a risk. You have to manage like your trust with that risk factor. But finding someone that you can really trust, that you don't have to think about what they're doing, you just go and do your thing that you're focused on, and that they're doing their stuff that they're focused on, and that they got it. And then if someone fucks up, you can call each other out on it, right? Like that's everything. So trust and just understanding that if you really want to make that jump, you don't have a choice. Right?
You have to find somebody or people.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Like trust in bringing other people in and trusting those people implicitly, giving trust first, right? And if they break that trust, then that's a bigger conversation. But like, you're really not going to know until you just like trust someone, right? And trusting your intuition. This is a good person. Yeah, let's do this. Okay, we're going. This is the direction. Like set the course and then like push them off and
see what happens.
Hope for the best. Have some good, good communication in place too. Like, hopefully you've had some vulnerable conversations where you're like, okay, I kind of got a vibe of like who this person is. But it's just like, what's the alternative, I guess, is the biggest thing, right? It's like the alternative is you just stay as a maker and continue to do all the stuff on your own. And like maybe going through that process, you realize like, oh, I don't actually want to have a big business.
Yeah.
I love just like making shit, showing up to the markets and selling it. Like this is actually what I love to do.
Yeah.
And if like your whole trust experiment and bringing someone else new in like completely fails, then you just go back to that. So like, is there risk?
Yeah.
Maybe they damage your brand a little bit, but if it's you, like you just own it.
Take the fun out of it or something. Maybe
it's like, it isn't as big of a risk. It's like, you gotta do it. You don't know until you try.
Exactly. That's the thing.
Or you'll never know.
Or I would say this could be the alternative, where I think this is maybe for me where the risk lied was I genuinely think that if I hadn't met you, I don't think that Goldilocks would be here.
Huh.
I don't know if I've ever told you that. This is number two.
Sweet.
And here's the thought process behind this. And I think that this happens to a lot of people. We're talking about makers a lot today on this episode, and that's what's kind of the focus was if I would have been burnt out, probably by Christmas, I maybe would have lasted like another 6 months. Right? Like I would have gone through, could you imagine? Like, you know what that Christmas season was like.
Oh, yeah.
If I had done that by myself, it would have been, it's so crazy to think because it was such a positive experience because I was so busy and so many people wanted our wraps. I either would have just had to have come to terms with the fact that like there is only so much I can do with one person.
Right.
But my personality type, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, tends to not be like that. I definitely have a bit of an overachiever attitude, and I probably would have just burnt myself out trying to keep up with the demand because I also was very much of the opinion, and because it was something I was so passionate about, that I was like, I want to get this product in as many people's hands that want it. And I, like, if someone wants them, I don't want to have to turn them down. Right? Because that was like, and it wasn't just the money. Obviously, the money side of that is great. You never want to have to turn down a sale. But I also felt like there was this like bigger picture of like,
you have to really resist if you're just gonna like just take it.
Yeah, I was just like,
I want you to take this.
I just want you to have these, and like having people come up and like knowing that I wasn't going to be able to keep up with production. So I feel like the reason I say that is that I don't know if Goldilocks would be here would be because I probably at a certain point would have just like continued on that train, gotten burnt out, gotten overwhelmed, been maybe like unhappy about not being able to make that leap, and very likely would have just like called it quits and moved on to a different job. Because also not making money at that point. Like we're doing sales, but all of the money at that point was going back into the business. So it was like, we talk about the margins, and I know people always hear that and they think you're like, rolling in cash. It's very much not the case. Like running a business is expensive. Buying all the ingredients is expensive. Like all the stuff that goes into it. But yeah, so I feel like, and I've seen that with other people. I've seen that with other people who have really wanted to do like bigger things, and they end up just getting overwhelmed because they're trying to do it on their own. And then you either like burn out or it just like loses its luster, and you're like, I can't do this anymore. And you feel like there's no other alternative because that maybe you don't want to go back to just maybe doing it on the weekends. Because also maybe for your business, that's not sustainable for you to make a full-time income either. Like maybe you have to scale if you want to do something full-time, or you just go back and you quit what you're doing and you just get another job, because at a certain point it's easier, because running your own business is really, really fucking hard. And especially if you're doing it by yourself. So I definitely have thought about that, where I've told other people this, so it's interesting. I haven't told you this before, that I've said like,
you've told me.
I have. Okay. I couldn't remember. I was like, yeah, I don't think that this business would be here if we hadn't met, and that like that our skill sets like came together in that like very perfect way.
True. Yeah. And like, I wouldn't be involved in a business in the capacity that I am without someone as a founder, like implicitly trusting me as much as you have. So it works both ways, right? Like you've really given that trust and I haven't broken it. So like, therefore we've been able to just go. Right. But, trust is a tricky thing. Like people get in their head about stuff. Even when you're necessarily like everything's good, stories can get created, and like a lot of like self, like what's like the like self-sabotage. I was gonna say like self-implosion. Sabotage is implosion is like a more radical term, I guess. But it happens a lot, right? Like start to think like, oh, this person's not working as hard as I am, and like all of a sudden the focus like it drifts away from like the business. And so it's a challenging thing. And I'm just I'm grateful that we've been able to do that. The one other thing I would say too, like the trusting someone and bringing that person in, and just everybody just kind of like focusing and like going full speed, is the reinvestment part. Like that is such a huge key part. If you're just a maker, and you're surviving off of your market cash, that's sweet, that's great. But at some point you got to like stop taking the money out, and it's just all got to go back in. When people are like, well, how do I hire someone? It's like,
You got to use that
you're
cash.
probably going to
Yeah.
stop paying yourself for a bit and
Yeah.
hire someone, but 6 months later, you'll be able to pay yourself a lot more. Or a year later, you'll be able to pay yourself a lot more. Because if you start hiring one person, maybe you hire a second person. And most entrepreneurs, like everybody that run a real proper business, they pay people in their business for the first year, maybe the first 2 years, but they don't necessarily take that much money out for themselves. And if they do, it's like, I got to pay my rent and I got to buy
Mhm.
food. And
It's that
like,
like founders eat last,
yeah,
right?
like leaders eat
Leaders
last.
eat last. That's what it
Leaders
is.
eat
Yeah.
last, yeah. And there's a lot of other stuff you hear like pay yourself first. And but when you're bootstrapping a company, unless you're gonna go out and like raise money and I'm gonna give this person, 10% of my company and they're gonna give me like 200 grand,
Mhm.
and you can set yourself a salary and you've got a whole marketing plan. We didn't do that.
No.
It was just like
Self-funded
a
completely.
thousand turned
Yeah.
into 2,000, turned into 4,000, turned into 10, and it just kept rolling back in until finally we looked at it and we were like, okay, here's your first $3,000 paycheck this month.
Yeah.
And it was like a year in, and it was like, whoa, like we did it,
Yeah.
we paid ourselves, like that's sick. But we really, really had to build it up
Mhm.
and build up that safety net too. I think that's another important thing is I'm pretty conservative with our
Mhm.
finances in the business, but when tough times come, you're going to be real glad that you're conservative.
Yeah.
Like we're going into potential recession now. There was a mini recession in 2018 that we kind of went through.
It's
The
not a matter of if, it's when, right?
Yeah, the pandemic hit, and like overnight, this will be a story for a whole another podcast, but overnight we lost like $70,000 in the business.
Yeah.
Like March of 2020. And it was just
literally
like, is
just
this
woke
it?
up.
Is it
Yeah.
over? Like almost.
Yeah. It was pretty close.
Close.
We had a couple close calls.
Yeah.
More than once.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that don't spread yourself too thin, like reinvest and just live below your means. And then you can really go for it. If you live a humble life and you don't spend too much, you can build some really cool shit.
Yeah.
Without having to give up, percentages of your company to
Yeah.
the people who are going to like throw money at you.
Mhm.
Because then if they give you your money, then they're going to tell you what to do as well.
Yeah.
And
it doesn't
if you don't
always
take their money,
it doesn't
they
always
can't tell you what to do.
it doesn't always go well. I have other friends as well who, you hear the horror stories about people who have people who buy into their businesses
Right.
and it like implodes. We'll go with that word, implodes the company
Mm-hmm.
because it's just they're like butting. It's just not a good fit, or they're butting heads, or all those kinds of things. So I don't know what the answer to this question is. So I'm curious to see what your thoughts are, because
Cool.
I've been asked this on multiple occasions because
Mm.
people will meet us or hear about us and our dynamic and obviously how well we work together, and they're like, how do I find, like, I don't have, like, we have also kind of just like literally like fell into meeting each other. Like there's a very lucky
cosmic
kind of
coincidence.
cosmic, universal, like whatever you want to
Yeah.
call it in that sense, which I do believe in. I believe in all of that kind of stuff. I think when you're in alignment with what you're doing in your life, those things all of a sudden start to happen more
Yeah.
frequently, and then you're like, I don't think it's a coincidence anymore.
For sure.
But if someone's out there, and I've been asked this, how do I find a business partner? I don't have someone currently in my life that feels like they would be the right person,
Mm-hmm.
right? How do you, and I don't have an answer for that because we just found each other. So I'm like, I don't know what the answer for that is. If someone's looking for someone, like, how do you get it out into the world that that's something? How do you know it's the right person if it's maybe a stranger that you're meeting and you're just, bringing them into your life for the first time, or it's maybe like a bigger company that's like wanting to be involved and you don't really know them that well. Like, again, we had the luxury of like really knowing each other quite well before we decided to work together.
Right. I mean, I think it's like you have to obviously do some personal growth work, figure out like what makes you tick, what like who you are as a person. That's huge, because like if you really know yourself, then like when you meet somebody else that aligns with you, it's a lot easier to spot like, oh yeah, me and this person get on, and like I can see that there won't be a lot of conflict here, and like it's all good vibes, and we can really go. You're never really going to know until you do it, but building up your own self-awareness, I think, is massive to help with your intuition with other people. And then the other thing is just like start meeting a shitload of people. Like when I got to Victoria, I was just like, started working at like Sitka, the little like surf brand here in Victoria. I was doing some volunteering with like Fernwood community, some different events that they were putting up. Gift of good food. I did some like volunteering with them. helped with like the Victoria Tool Library. Like I got to Victoria and I was just like, I just want to see how many people I can meet
Mm-hmm.
and get really engaged in the community. And you just start like meeting more and more people and sharing ideas and telling them like what you're into and what you're excited about. And I think the more that you do that, the better you're going to get at just like, it's like you can't really just go put an ad on use
Exactly.
Victoria or
Yeah.
like Victoria, sorry, like put an ad on like Facebook Marketplace or something like searching for a business partner. You could, and
Exactly.
maybe people find each other that way. That's not how we did it.
No.
But the organic way of doing it is like technically we met, at a market. That's like where we reconnected
Yeah.
in the market scene, right?
Yeah. We were introduced somewhere else, but I feel like we started the friendship essentially from
Right.
being back at the market.
Yeah. So that's it. Like go out there and just like keep meeting people.
I love that.
And like meet, like there's so many great meetups. We went to an amazing little event last night with a bunch of other entrepreneurs. And there was people there that are like running their businesses by themselves, right? And there's a lot of people and like you show up and, this person's finance and business and spreadsheets and this person's branding. And like, maybe they both just started and you never know.
Yeah. So it's kind of like consciously inserting yourself into that like business community and beyond.
Yeah.
Right. Because you never know where you're going to actually find someone. But you're right. I think at the event we were at last night, it was definitely skewed towards e-commerce, but it wasn't just owners. Like there were people who were involved in like, I learned about what a fractional CFO was for the first time last night, which I will explain to all of you because I think this is cool. This person is basically a CFO, but not with one specific company. It's fractional because he works with a lot of smaller businesses who maybe aren't in a place to hire a full-time CFO, but still need the same kind of advice. So he divides his time amongst, it's basically at an hourly rate where he provides those like same kind of services. And so you have the option to have like a CFO on your team without having to hire somebody on full time because that's way too big of a commitment for you. And I was like, I didn't even know that was a thing. I was like, that's amazing. I feel like so many people that I know would be interested in something like that because it's a very accessible way to build your team as well, which I think is really cool. And I would say the other thing too, because I've seen this with other people, I think that we alluded to this quite a few times, but if you're kind of doing that like self-reflection and thinking about like, well, how do I operate as like a person and, conflict resolution, and like, what am I looking for in a business partner? I also think it's important to maybe be intentional with beyond that and kind of think about like, what are the things that like only you as the founder can do in the business?
Nice.
And we've talked a lot too, and we do this with our team kind of like once a year of making a list of like, what are the things that we each love doing within our role and responsibilities? What do we hate doing? Hate's a strong word, but I feel like all of us love most of what we do. But this is the odd thing. Sometimes you love it in the beginning and then maybe you do it for a while and you don't like it anymore. What are the things that you're good at?
Yeah.
What are your strengths? And what do you feel like you are maybe like not so great at? And I feel like that would be a really good exercise for people to do as part of that like kind of two-pronged approach of self-reflection. I think it's really important if you're looking for a business partner to know a lot about yourself in terms of just like those soft skills. Your like emotional intelligence, like how do you deal with conflict resolution, like all of those kinds of things about like your own being as a human. And then also just like your skill set and what are you looking to bring on in terms of roles and responsibilities. Because I do see a lot of people sometimes who will find a person that they get along with really well and they have that like more like personal side of things and that like, they really just like feel like they jive and they're both really passionate and they both really want to like, and you're like, I'm going to build a business together. But then they learn they actually are only interested in the same aspects of the business. And then all of a sudden you have this giant gaping hole of things that aren't being looked after. And then it's really easy to go down this like slippery slope of like resentment because maybe you thought that you brought this person on board to look after those things and they thought they were coming on board and that you were going to take care of it. So I think being really clear about that. And, I think you need to have both pieces of that puzzle, like having very clear kind of like outlines of what someone's skill set is and then make sure that aligns. And then also that like other kind of soft skills piece of like personality, getting along. We have like this is kind of beyond business partners, but we have a bit of a standing kind of like litmus test I think because you asked me this, and this is how this became a thing. I have a tendency to overthink things from time to time. I get in my head a little bit about stuff. And I remember there was a particular situation and we were deciding if we wanted to work with somebody or not. And I was really weighing the pros and cons. And I had, a lot of like intuition things that I was like maybe ignoring. And I think you could probably tell that. And so Brett asked me, would you want to go for a beer with them after work? I said, absolutely not.
Yeah.
And you said, then there's no fucking way that we're working with this person. And I feel like that has been like the litmus test for any kind of like, whether it's like an agency that we're hiring for something or, obviously like internal hiring, it's like a much more in-depth process. But at the end of the day, if I realize we're like thinking maybe like we're unsure, it's like, do I want to go for a beer with them one-on-one after work? Would I enjoy that?
Yeah.
Or
does that make me feel anxious? Like, oh, I don't know what I'd really talk about with this person.
Yeah.
Like, it's like, if you can't hang and just shoot the shit with someone, you probably shouldn't work with them.
Yeah.
And that's, I'm sure there's people who have different views on that. But as far as like the small business world, it gets intimate.
And especially the kind of business that we built. That was like an intentional thing where we wanted to have like a community of people, right? Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. That's good.
Should we go get a beer tonight?
Absolutely. Let's go get one right now.
Okay, cool.
Well, should we wrap this one up then on that note?
Sounds good.
Awesome. Nice one. Okay. We'll be back with another one soon and more goods. This podcast brought to you by Goldilocks Goods. All right. That's it. We're out.